So there are at least two different ways to kind of approach the conversation, or what got me to thinking about it in the first place. So I'll talk about the two angles from which I started thinking about this thing at all, and then once I start the conversation, I'm going to do it on two levels, like on a macro level, if you would, and then on a micro personal level. And then hopefully by that time you will have thought of some stuff, and then we'll have an open conversation about it. Okay, so the first, I guess, angle is after an ethics class, because I teach ethics, I had a student came up and said, and I'm aware that this particular student had what you would call a Christian background and upbringing. So, and you know that by certain words, terms, and cliches that, folks who, I came up from that background, so I recognize it when I hear it, right? And so I recognized it here. And so she was saying, if you reap what you sow, why do bad things happen to good people? So this was the question. I was like, okay. I was like, that's not a simple question. It's complex because we kind of have to break that apart and talk about it. So I went and did a video about it, but it was a short one. It was just kind of beginning the thought process, distinguishing them. I guess in that video, what I really ended up doing was saying that these are two separate thoughts, and we should probably separate them and think about reaping and sowing as one thing, and kind of think of that in its context, and then think about the bad and the good in another context, and kind of separate those things and don't join them that way. So that's essentially what I said in the video, but here we're going to go a little bit broader, a little bit deeper. So that's the one angle. The other angle, also did a video about, but didn't go into that much depth, so I figured now is the time to do that. It's something I also noticed in the ethics class, also because of the Judeo-Christian background and influence. So at this point we're studying Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mill. And so these are, classic utilitarians or what have you. And one of the things that's happening when we're studying Bentham in particular is his idea is that pleasure is only measured quantitatively, like how much pleasure you have, that's the thing. Not the kind and the quality and all that. All right, so his successor, that's the one that comes after, right? Yeah, okay. So Mill ends up adding quality, to that mix to explain the human experience a bit better. But while we're talking about Bentham, I asked the class the same question that Bentham, was asked, that if you had the opportunity to be the Earth's happiest pig, swine happiness, never get turned into bacon and pork chops and, all that, swill up slop as long as your heart is content and all that good stuff. So you can either be that, right, or a normal person, you can be you. With everyday ups and downs and bad days and good days and happy times and sad times and so forth. All right, so what ends up happening is there's a cross section of answers. So for the people who decide to be the pig, there's usually two categories quickly. One is just somebody who didn't want to think about it very much, so they just wrote something they thought was going to be cute, and that's what happens. All right. But then there's also, a group of folks who either at that moment or, perpetually are going through a very hard, tough, difficult time that they don't really see a way out of in the immediate future. And for those folks, the pig seems like a good idea. And so I always say, hey, look, if that's the deal, let's talk about it somewhere else, not in the class situation, because the truth is most folks aren't ready for that kind of conversation with somebody who's willing to be. Because I say, I got a magic wand in my back pocket, I'm going to touch it and you turn into a pig. And for a person to say, yeah, sign me up, that's not a conversation we're going to have in public. Okay. But of the people who say no, I would rather be myself, well, that usually boils down along two lines as well. So the one is the one that's interesting for the class. When people say, oh, well, if I'm a pig, I can't get people pleasure. I can't do things that people can do, and I would rather have sad days as a person in order to experience the ups of a human that I imagine to be higher than the ups of a swilling pig, so forth. All right, so that's half. But the interesting part that I kind of wed to that first part I was telling you about is the half of the people, I guess at this point it's like a fourth, but the group of people who end up saying, well, you have to experience pain in order to understand pleasure. And that if you didn't have the pain, that you wouldn't be able to enjoy the pleasure. And so this is a good many people end up having that underlying sentiment. And I was like, okay. And so then once I started reading that a few years back, then I started, of course, anticipating it. And then once it would happen, I would then ask the class about it more directly and say, hey, look, some of y'all are thinking this thing. And then I would watch, and a whole bunch of people would be like, yep, that's exactly what I'm thinking. Okay, well, what I saw immediately in that, well, almost immediately, was that there's a double-edger in there, because with the Judeo-Christian background, then there's these certain notions of God that you're going to end up having. All right, so if you've got a notion of God that involves these kind of popularized ideas of God is my homeboy in such a way that the goodness of my relationship will mean that I don't have life difficulty. Now, if you press them on that, they'll say, okay, maybe it'll be a little bit, but God still is going to make it easier and, smooth out my rough edges, right? Okay, and so there's a difference quite often between what people say and what it is that they, what they're really feeling, what it is that they're emoting. They can say one thing, right? So when I'm watching people talk about it, I can clearly see that what they are feeling in that is, yeah, if I'm in a good relationship with God, then it manifests by better things happening to me and less bad things happening. And that a mark of somebody who's having bad things happen or whatever is a mark of their distance from God. And that's what they're thinking. Now, they won't say that. Some of them will. But when I press them about it, they won't say it. But I can tell that that's what they feel. And then I also see that they have this other thought. So hopefully you're already seeing the contradiction, or the internal contradiction that will produce, but I want to spell it out a little bit more. Okay, so on the one hand, you've got this idea that there's a necessary pain that you have to go through, and it must be cyclical. It can't be that you experience it just one time and for life. It seems that you would have to go through a cycle, just like night and day cycles, and just like hot and cold cycles, you would have to cycle pain and joy. And if that's a necessary part of the cycle, well, that means you will necessarily be in pain, and not only necessarily, but you will be unable to experience joy without it by that thought. And that's clearly the thought. Now, if you got that on the one hand, and then on the other hand you got, and I want a good relationship with God, and my demonstration of my relationship with God is that good things happen, yet you think inherently that bad things must happen. Are you seeing the situation? Yes? Mm-hmm. Kind of? Okay. Well, all right, so it's, let me say it in a different way. You don't always have contradictory thoughts explicit in your mind. They're not right there available for you to easily see. It's that you have these notions that are conflicting without recognizing it, and you feel the conflict when things are unreconciled. In a moment of pain, in a moment of suffering, in a moment of what have you, that's when it comes out. That's when that tension comes out, or is felt, or comes manifest. Okay, so these things got me to thinking about it. Excuse me. Got me to think about it again. First, this recurring idea that was showing up in my ethics class, and then this question about good and bad. That helped again shine a light on the issue. So, all right. So full stop. Everybody see what the difficulty is. So before we can even address the question of why do bad things happen to good people, we first have to recognize that there's a certain level at which most people think that bad things must happen to good people. And that may even be a part of your thought system, without recognizing it until you kind of go in and really look and see if that's what you're really thinking. And so when you're really thinking that, then there's a sense in which you help in the production of the scenario. That's harder to see, and I'm going to try to talk about that because I said we're going to do the macro and then the micro. But at the macro level, there's a certain contribution, so to speak, that you have to your life experience and the things that come manifest. And so if one of the things that you have in your mind that you must manifest is a necessary pain, then you'll manifest it, and it'll happen, and then you will experience, and then you will orient yourself quite possibly to that painful thing. And then your orientation to that thing makes it where your life outlook ends up being through, this window of the pain and of the difficulty or what have you. And then in so doing, it recycles back to the question, because it's not like you're doing anything bad. It's not that you're doing anything bad. You'd be doing things that would be good, namely helping people, saying nice stuff, and not taking advantage of folks, and saying a kind word to people when you see them down, or not allowing folks to, in an exchange, if you see someone's rubbed the wrong way, you won't allow it to exist in that nasty, rubbed wrong way. You try to extend yourself past that. And so, I mean, these are marks of a good person who's doing good things. And then you'll have that simultaneous thought, well, then why am I in this one situation, and why is this happening? Without recognizing that there's some part of you that thinks it's necessary, and then you push yourself towards it. Okay, so we got that. All right, now let me back up for a second and talk about this more big picture. So you all have heard me talk before about, the connectivity of all things and all that kind of stuff. So let's go to a serious macro level and then zoom back down to this dimension, if you would. What in that comparison, we would call this dimension the relative dimension, the dimension of relativity. Have you ever heard that before?
Yeah.
A few people? Okay. So that kind of goes to what we were saying a second ago, this notion that you have to understand something by its opposite. As it turns out, universe-wide, that's not the only way. In fact, it's just the basic way to come to understand something. Our way of understanding that is a basic way of understanding, and at some point you can evolve, and we can evolve to a level of experience where we don't have to produce the negative or the opposite of the thing that we want in order to understand the thing that we want, because that is kind of what we're doing now. We will produce the opposite of what we want just to verify that that's not what we want. Think about it. And then in the midst of it, ask the question, why do bad things happen to good people, right? Okay, so again, backing up, looking at this being the world of relative. Well, if this is the world of relative, then so is what we're calling good and bad. What we're calling good and bad is also relative. And if we were to imagine a whole life, not just its experience, but like a whole life, and we would see its ups and downs and the overall net effect of its production or what have you, we might then see those things that in time we would call bad, relative. We might not think that, outside of time. Now, the example that I use on the video is a Spider-Man example, but I can use a different one. I like that one though, because it was kind of, I was up late one night, flipping through the channels. My little one, she would like Spider-Man when she, was. I did too when I was little, and then I grew out of it. But like sub 3, she was really serious about Spider-Man, so I ended up having to watch them ahead of time, so that nothing foul would be on it. You never know, they could sneak something in, and I don't want her to see at 3 or whatever, like Black Cat, for instance, the way she moves. But at any rate, so I'm watching Spider-Man, and the long and short of it is, you've got multiple dimensions being represented. All right, of which ours is one. Now, in this case, they're parallel dimensions, not stacked hyperdimensions. So I'm not thinking in terms of 4, 5, 6, 7, 26. Thinking of dimensions as parallel, beside, splits of the same. So one way to think about that is just counterfactuals. A situation that could have been but isn't, there's some world where it is. And so it's like that's a parallel world running beside this one. Okay, and so you lay all that out. All right, so what ends up happening in this particular cartoon is you got 8 of them. And from each parallel world, you have a Spider-Man. Each of them are different because each of them has had a different situation happen in their life or whatever. So when they bring them all together, there's like, hey, look, there is a massive threat that's going to wipe out the whole deal. It's going to kill us all. All dimensions will be collapsed. It's going to go all bad. And one of y'all going to have to stop this from going down. So we need to see which one of y'all can do it. Now, each of them was different. So like one of them, for instance, he had his mutation had gone too far, so he looked like an actual spider. The man spider. So he looked more like the spider than man. That was ungood. And there was one of them who was really mysterious. He was really weird. At any rate, the two most interesting ones though are our Spider-Man and then the superstar Spider-Man, Peter Parker Superstar. And so Peter Parker Superstar. Seriously, did not have to hide his identity because he was a superstar. He didn't hide his special powers. He was Peter Parker, Spider-Man, superstar. His parents hadn't been killed. His uncle was still alive. He lived in big mansions, and the people who are the villains in our timeline are on his payroll. Okay, so you get these two cats, right? So you get Spider-Man Superstar is with regular Spider-Man. And they're having to go through, tough missions. Well, when they come up against tough stuff, our Spider-Man's been through gritty stuff. People done died. You know, he done spent nights up crying. You know, Superstar Spider-Man has never cried about anything. You know, nothing has never gone bad. He hadn't had to stop and have pause before he does something, because everything he does ends up working out well. And that's exactly why he did not get to do the mission, because he did not have the appropriate considerations at all. He was, in fact, what one would call naive. Naive in a very dangerous way when it comes to being a superhero, so to speak, in this case. And so the reason that our Spider-Man ends up being, you know, the one to do the mission is because he had experienced death, pain, struggle. He knew what was at stake. I mean, it wasn't a joke. When something serious happened, he wasn't laughing. You know, Superstar Spider-Man was like, oh, I can handle this. And, you know, he just wanted to run in and make it happen and end up blowing the mission. And they had to regroup. Say, I told you not to do it. He's like, but I'm a superstar. Okay. So hopefully you're understanding through the story, because I found it extremely interesting for the very reasons that we're saying now. I was already thinking about dimension stuff. I was already thinking about this issue of, you know, good things, bad people, all that. So then I start thinking, right, we are in an American context, and the American context teaches you that you're this individual and that you're separate. But if we return to the notion that we are these joint, you know, that we are an organism all together, then really we can then begin to kind of reinterpret our pains a bit differently. Because at the end of the day, they are not individual to us. Somebody else does feel what we feel. No matter how bad or crazy or strange or extreme, no matter what you think it is, there's somebody who's feeling that thing. And whenever you go through something, like if we go back to New Testament stuff in the book of James, James has a conversation about, you know, when you go through something really difficult, or if you go through a serious pain, he says, count it joy, you're being expanded. So what does he mean by that? Well, I can tell you from my personal experience, the more really tough things that you've dealt with, the more personal pains that you've had to walk through, the more time that you've had to spend on the front row at the funerals, the more time that you've had to spend, you know, kind of reflecting on what's the meaning of life, how does this go. The more time you do that, when somebody comes to talk to you and they're in pain, you see it because you know what it looks like, you know what it feels like. When they have a conversation about something that they're going through, there's a way in which that you offer a help just because you can resonate with them in a spot where they can feel very alone. And the more that kind of connecting happens, I mean, think about it. What is a support group at the end of the day? And why is it that we have to build support groups? Mainly it's because of this individualized thing we've got going. Where we've separated ourselves from our already functioning what would be support group, so to speak. So there's a sense in which when I start thinking about it that way, the pain and the suffering that you have, if you turn it internal and keep it there, then it could potentially stay like that. But when you recognize it or think about it in terms of, now not in the acute moment of pain, I recognize when something happens there has to be a dealing with that thing, okay? And there's a process of dealing. But as the dealing begins to unfold, there's a certain lens, a perspective that it gives you that you can actively choose to have, that you can choose to look out at the world and recognize that there are a lot of faces out there, but there's a whole lot of pain going on right behind the scenes. And that the more you are acquainted with that thing, the more you can help that person. And the more you actually help that person, the more you help, guess who?
Yourself.
Exactly. Because it causes you to do something that you wouldn't do ordinarily, and that's try to walk out of it. In many cases of pain, it goes hand in hand with depression. And if you're in perpetual pain, perpetual depression, and if you're in that, then you're doing that good stuff that we were talking about a little while ago, then it really seems to be strange as to why you're a good person and having these certain kinds of feelings. And a part of that process I would offer has to do with turning it from, in to out. Initially it's in because you have to kind of deal with how you feel. Honestly, dealing with how you feel. Honestly. Not, why I keep saying that is because people will always have suggestions about how you should feel and how you should think and all that kind of stuff. And that's them clicheing, trying stuff out loud in hopes that it works out. Shots out in the dark, and if it works, then maybe I'll try it for myself. Seriously. So recognize that that's what's happening, when they're saying the things that they're saying, right? And I think, okay, cool. But you deal with how it is that you feel honestly, because only then can you, because there is a way that you feel about it, and until you get to there's no getting through there, right? So you get honest about that, Then once that happens, all right, sinks in a bit, then you look back out at the world. You say, okay, now what can I see more clearly? What can I recognize much more? I'll tell you one real quick. So there was a moment, but now I will tell you this. Now when James says it broadens you, he doesn't warn you that it makes you burst into tears uncontrollably at times when you don't expect it. Because things can touch you in ways that you don't know, because you become so expanded that you can feel so many things. But at any rate, I'll just give you a quick example, just where a look tells me everything I need to see. So there's a motorcycle racer, some would say the motorcycle racer, by the name of Valentino Rossi. So, all right, so Val Rossi is like, the 9 times world champ, awesome cat. All right, so the doctor, he still rides, he's a legend, still making it happen. But a few years back, he was involved in this accident where one of his good friends, who he had mentored up through the ranks and who was also getting faster and faster and had come up, and was also in the MotoGP or whatever, he was in an accident where his friend was killed, and it was his bike that struck the other rider. What ends up happening, well, at any rate, Simoncelli's bike ended up going perpendicular to the track, only because of his heroic skill. That's another amazing thing, because you're talking about bad things happening to good people. What ends up happening is most people, like me for instance, would have crashed and been out of the way. But he crashed the bike, picked it back up off the ground with his knee and his elbow, pushed it back up off the ground, and it caught traction and then turned him back into the track perpendicular. And so as he went back perpendicular, then Rossi T-bones him, and so does Colin Edwards, and they T-bone his body, and then it flips out. All right, so it's not just that his good friend and mentee was killed, he was involved in it, so there's that. All right, so there's this moment where I'm watching the coverage after the fact, and so there's this moment wherever Rossi, he's the main man, is at the funeral, at Simoncelli's funeral, and he is, as a part of the funeral celebration situation, they had 2 of his bikes, 2 of Simoncelli's race bikes, because it was his passion, and nobody says he shouldn't have been riding. That's not the way they think about it. When that happens, they say you died doing something you loved, and so everybody's not that lucky, so forth. And so they had his actual motorcycles at the funeral. Well, what ends up happening after the funeral is Rossi is walking one of the bikes out. Now that's something that other people can do, but you got the 9 times world champ who wants to do it himself, because this is his boy. So he's walking his bike out of the church. So it's just a still shot of Rossi's face while he's walking Simoncelli's bike out of the church, and I just broke down because I knew exactly, I could feel it. Yeah, I could feel it. Our brother was killed in an auto accident, so I could see it, I could feel it through the picture, and I was just like, oh my gosh, I know exactly what I'm looking at. And so it ends up, I wouldn't have known. I just thought, oh yeah, he's wheeling his bike out, but I now realize the importance of having to do that kind of thing in that situation. He wants to be the one to do it. Like me at my brother's funeral, I wanted to be the one that was holding the casket. I'm going to be one of the bearers. I try to do it all, right? And so I could see it in that glimpse. So that's part of what I guess I mean by dealing with the pains, but then when you turn it outward, it broadens you in a way that you become, much more able to help others transition out of that painful place or what have you. The place where at some level many folks are thinking that we have to be while we're in this relative situation where we have to go through these pains in order to contrast and understand our joys. And if you think that's true, then it's true for you. And so that you end up doing that thing. And so while we're working our way out of that, one thing is recognize that, all right, from one perspective, sure, in the acute, it's bad. There's nothing I'm going to say in the acute moments is going to be good about those kinds of pains, right? But in the long-term situation, you would have to say there's some sense in which it happened in purpose. It happened in reason. It happened in this particular kind of way, right? And so from that perspective, it ends up being quite a bit different. Quite a bit different, actually. So how do I mean? Since that has happened, in my office, let's say, I've had at least, 10, 15, maybe more people who've had somebody very close to them to die, or worse, be killed, or something like that. Like really fresh, and then they come straight into my office. And so when they're sitting there, the only reason I can sit there and be an anchor in the situation that they are talking through is because I have been to that depth of that kind of pain, and I know what I'm looking at when that person is there, and they know that they don't have to hide anything from me because I see, and they can see that I can see, and that kind of thing. And you will be, and that's what ends up, happening while we're in this experience, sharing this thing that we think is pain. Right. So to return to the initial question, and then we'll open it up. The bad things happening to good people, right? There's some sense in which I think that we don't have to think about it that way, right? We don't have to think about it that way. We can think that we have these opportunities and these kind of experiences as life folds out. We end up interpreting them in certain ways, right? They impact us in certain ways that make us who we are. But there's a large sense in which we choose our lives by choosing our orientation, to these things. And so what I'm saying about this particular pain and good thing is if you frame it that way, you're already focused in that direction, in the direction that somehow I'm good and I don't deserve this bad thing. And you've already framed it in that particular dynamic, as opposed to immediately seeing this is a life, not just of my own, but one where I'm in contact and in connection with other people. And these things don't happen in isolation. And so though I am going through this, it is connecting me to people in some kind of fundamental way, and I can choose how to operate in that connection. All right. I'm done with that one for right now. So let's open it up for questions and whatnot. I know that was kind of heavy, so you're going to take a second to kind of, but what did you think it was going to be, right? Yes, ma'am.
So my first
Okay,
question,
1, 2, yeah.
my first question is going to be something like, do you think people experience equal amounts of pain just over their life, but like different times? Because I know that sometimes I can see myself going through a hard time, and then I'm wondering why am I the only one? And then a couple of years down the road, I see other people dealing with a lot of tough stuff when I'm in a good place. But then at the end, I kind of felt like you were saying people's calling might determine the pain that they're going to experience throughout their life.
Yeah. Okay. So, so is it the same for everybody? No, it's certainly not. And if we had to, it's not really a scale for this, right? But if I had to imagine it, right, I would have to think that if there was some kind of feeling of pain index, there could be different people would have different thresholds. Let's just put it like that. And a lot of that would have to do with your life experience. So, so for instance, just like we were just finished talking about, because I end up being in a network of folks who have lost loved ones and that kind of thing, something that they often always say is that when their friends come up to them and they say just broke up with their girlfriend or boyfriend, that they don't have patience for that kind of problem because it's not as serious as their own. And so that's the time where we have to remind everybody that it's all relative. It's all relative, and it's how you feel it. And if a person, by contrast, hasn't had another pain that puts them in that kind of a feeling, then that's their pain that's putting them in that kind of a feeling. And so I don't want to belittle anybody's pain just because they haven't been a hostage and tortured and that kind of thing, right? Because at the same time, we do want to leave room for saying there have been some people who have been through some extremely horrendous stuff where you wonder how they maintain their humanity. So there's clearly that, right? Now, we can do it both ways. So from the one perspective, do I think that there's an association with your calling, your life profession, and the experience that will end up? Yes, absolutely. I absolutely think that's the case. Now, could it be the case that, let's think about it like this, instead of thinking of time linearly in the sense of from the past going to the future, imagine it that consciousness is already, imagine, in the future pulling physicality forward. Imagine that. And so if that were happening, then in that case, there's an already understanding of what you must be and what you must go through in order to be that. And so there's already a pulling of you through what you must become. Because it's already, at one level it already is anyway. At this level it's unfolding in time, so to speak. So the mechanism that's continually pulling you through time or what have you already understands that manifestation. Does that help? So it would be only at this level that I'm questioning why I'm going through this, because at another level I help to orchestrate my own pain. See, this is the thing. Remember, you gotta put, let's go back a few talks, right? Remember that if I'm saying that, the truth of us is the eternal spirit, then this life is like a smaller kind of an episode. It's not the whole deal. And that once outside of this episode, the seriousness of this episode subsides. Now, right now it's really serious because, you're in it just like your dream. When you're in your dream is really serious. And then when you wake up, you put it into context. You go, oh, that was rough. All right. And then you've learned something and you put it into context. And so I think that this life and lives are that way. I hope that answers what my thoughts was. Yes, sir.
What I got from this is, in the macro, there's no such thing as a bad thing on your perception or your perspective. Is that a correct connection?
Yes. All right. Yes, that's true. It's All right. So, let's imagine one way we do this. Right. So I saw this cartoon strip once where it was a game of chance, and two people can be playing a game of chance, but they get really excited, about the next roll or the next turn of the dice or the next flip of the card or what have you, even in a game of complete chance. And then you rev yourself up and you get an attachment to what it means and all that. But strictly speaking, it means nothing. It's what we attach to it, and it's the feeling you have about it and all that produces all of that, right? So yes, it's that way. There's a level at which it just is. And then there's a level at which it's relative. And then I would say, well, that thing is bad relative to this thing, and that would be right. But there would be a level where I wouldn't see it that way. I have another example for you, but I see you got another question. Okay, so, all right. I used this example before, but it's still very applicable. And it's the martial arts example of getting stuff demonstrated on me. Right, so whenever I was a white belt, I did not enjoy having stuff demonstrated on me. And so, my teacher was really big for, he was big on growing techniques. And so he would always act like, so the whole thing when you're going to do a growing technique is you slap somebody on the inner thigh, you don't really jam them up in the, and then he just went, pow, like all the time. And it would, and his hand would stop, but his energy would continue up, and I would get all sick and fall. Anyway, so anytime when it was time to demonstrate a technique, I wanted no parts of it because I knew it was going to be painful for an extended period of time. Okay, so you fast forward 5 or 6 years or what have you. So by the time I'm, a black belt and moving up through the ranks or what have you, and then at that point, and I just happened to think about it one day because I didn't really notice when it happened. But then one day, as a black belt, I recognized that I was volunteering. I recognized that he would say, all right, I got this technique, and I'd be like, and then it would hurt now, and I'd be on the ground. I mean, he'd do it, pow, and I'd be on the ground, crumpled up, laughing. And then I'd get up, and the more it would hurt, the more I would laugh about it, right? And the people thought I was buck crazy. And I would say, look, you can't understand what it's going to do to somebody unless you have it done to you, right? And then you can't be responsible with the technique unless you had the technique done to you. Then you can be responsible and you know how to administer it, what's too hard and all that kind of stuff. But I was also, by that time, I then thought techniques were beautiful. There was a beauty I could see in the technique when it was executed well. So as a white belt, I was just looking for the pain. By the time I was a black belt, I could see the beauty in the technique. And so by the time the technique was finished being executed and I was on the ground hurting, I was sitting there admiring the beauty of it. While I felt my body going, oh, that was a good one. Now, if we take it just from the understanding of my body, just the shock that my body receives, it's the same when I was a white belt and when I was a black belt. The act itself was the same. My orientation to it was different. And when I was a white belt, it was a cause for dread. It was a reason that I would not go back to the dojo. I mean, it was in the old school. He would call me at my house. Son, you coming to practice? I was like, I wasn't. And then I'd be like, I ain't got a ride. I'm going to send somebody to pick you up. Right? Now, by the time I'm, a black belt, I'm showing up like, what we going to learn today? All right, let me see it. Oh! So then one day I just had to stop and think, what's different? It's me. Right? It's what I'm thinking about. When I was a white belt, I was thinking, this is about to happen to me. As a black belt, I thought, I'm about to learn something. And I'm going to be able to show it to people, I fold somebody up, whatever. Yeah, but thank you for the question. Is there another question? Yes, ma'am.
How would you deal with, feelings of, it sounds harsh, but, revenge almost? When bad things are done to you, or you're, in a situation where people could have helped that situation
And it did.
and gotten you out of that, or done something about it, but they didn't, and then you're just like up there to deal with it, and you have so much anger built up,
Right.
and then, you know, you want to like hold on to the idea of karma, like, okay,
Right.
well, it'll come back around or whatever, and
But that's
try
in
to
fact
just
revenge,
find
and not
peace
actually
with it,
karma.
but so,
Right. No, I understand. I feel you. I'm going to tell you the answer easily. All right, the easy answer, and then I'll explain it more. We'll span it out a little bit more. So the easy answer is when you're mad with them, the immediate anger is for the position you allowed them to be in, and for them to then fail you after you allowed them to be in that position. And so the true anger is with yourself, and it takes a while to see that. Even though it's that person who left you side of the road, stranded, you know, for the wolves to get and what have you, all you had to do is get your lazy self up. I mean, it can go on, but there's a sense in which it was my expectation that this person would do this thing that really has hurt my feelings, and because they didn't, now something needs to happen to them. You know, and so that's it's not something you can snap your fingers about even once you realize it. Even once you realize that the anger is with yourself, it still doesn't subside immediately, because some would say that anger is a spirit or a vibration or a fog that kind of rolls in that you have to kind of keep trying to clear out and clear out and clear out, because there's a sense in which we don't want to accept it, and so we push it out. But the minute you push it out, it turns right back to anger for the other person. And so then when you recognize it's anger at you, then you go sad. But to avoid being sad, it's easy to go mad, and then you go mad, you go project, and you're mad with them again. And so you have to stay with it in the sad place and then overcome this. You got to fire out through the sad, not back through the mad, because then that just perpetuates it. I've been there. Look, I remember. I'm not going to tell the story, but I remember thinking all kinds of stuff, like, you know what would be cool if it happened? So, I mean, I told it out loud to the person who I was confessing all things to, or what have you, and the person said, well, at least that was fantastical and not something that can really happen. I was like, okay. Anyway, so yeah, I think that there's a sense in which you are tied into that person's vibration still, when you are still shooting them angry and being mad and holding them to a relating that you're thinking that they should be in some kind of a way. And if they are continually demonstrating themselves to not be that, then let them go and don't allow them back into that space.
Of course.
Of course, that's the easy answer, right? Yeah. The hard answer is how you feel. That's what you think, right? But what you feel in the moment is what you feel, and then you got to deal with how you feel, for sure. That's why I said the short answer is the middle answer. I got it. The long answer is the emotional one. Were you telling me that he was raising his hand? Oh, you had one too. Okay. So 1, 2.
Well, I guess mine kind of piggybacks off of hers. In that situation, or in any situation where you're trying to figure out your own emotions in a particular event, you know, some people I feel are more inclined to just let it go and say, okay, this happened, I learned from it, move on, right?
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people can't do that very easily.
Right.
In those situations, for the people who have a much more difficult time, you know, stepping outside of it and saying, okay, this is what I learned, this is how I have to deal with it, and it wasn't as negative a thing as it, you know, I once thought it was. How does one get to that point?
Right. Okay, so let me just reiterate the question, right? So it seems that different people have different rates of coping with things, and some people are quick to let things go. Some people want to hold on and brood for an extended period of time. And so the question is, how do you help facilitate that process away from brooding into letting go? Right. All right, so imagine it like this then. So I think this time thing kind of helps us out. This trying to stop seeing time as this kind of line like that. But if you were to see it that way, let's just talk right now as if we were going to keep thinking it like that in a straight line. If you were going through a room like this, let's imagine, and you were coming in the door and you had to get really, really, really quickly to the back corner and you were going to run. Imagine you turned around backwards to do it. So what's liable to happen? Exactly, right. So that's how you end up doing your life. And so it's a thing where, you know, they were talking about how there was a movie I saw. It might have even been Flight of the Navigator, but it was when I was in the Navy, so I know I was paying, you know, close attention to it or what have you. And what ends up happening is they're talking to this one pilot, and they say to him, it's usually not the mission you're on that kills you, but the one before. And so there's a, sense in which somebody continually thinking about a mistake or an error or something that they did before is what causes the one in the current. And so the person who is continually orienting themselves to a stagnant, stationary past that they're continually feeding energy into backwards while they're trying to grow away from it, they're going through their life backwards in that way. And so they will be tripping over things continually into the future because they are focused on that thing in the past. Yeah.
Wait,
Yes.
what if there are things that bring it to their forefront continuously, even if they don't want to?
Well, then there's a lesson that has to be learned. So just to repeat that, if there's something that you're seeing recurring, then you should believe that there's something in that thing that you haven't yet seen. There's some part of that picture that hasn't become illuminated yet. And that you get another look at it until you see it, and then goes away, and if it comes back and you're seeing it again, then there's something else that needs to be looked at. Now, it could be a lot of different things. A recurring look at something could be, I need to see something internal in myself right now, or it could be, I'm going to encounter something in the very near future that I have to be very, very sure about, so I've seen it repetitively until that point. So it really it depends. It's one of those things. Okay.
Well, no. Okay.
Go
So
ahead.
like court cases where, yeah, it takes like 3 years for them to convict someone, or even once the court case is over, they're still sending you mail about what the person did to you. Or
But you don't think that's justice anyway, though, right?
No. I don't think about it as justice at all. I'm just saying I still have to deal with paperwork.
Okay, you're talking about something else altogether.
Okay.
That's something else altogether. There's the interaction with other people, and then there's how you feel about it, right? And so there's your orientation to that thing, and what it brings up in you when it happens, and there's the fact that it's not going to erase from existence. It happened, so it's not going to not happen ever. It's not ever going to not happen at this point. Okay, so at that point, it becomes a different kind of a part of the path. And even though there is a constant reminder of it, there still has to be a forward look, even with the backwards glance. The Janus face, as they say. Yeah. Let's get a few more. If we got it. All right. Well, thank y'all very much. I'll pack it up. Let's give yourselves a hand. Y'all went through a tough one. That was a tough one for you.